Good morning. Thanks everybody so much for joining us. We still have about 2 or 3 minutes before we begin here at the top of the hour. In the interim, if you want to head over to our event page, you can find and download the slides as well as the resources for today's webinar. We'll place that link in the chat pod for your convenience here in a minute. Also saw a couple of folks saying hello. Thank you so much. It's always nice to get a sense for who's joining us. So if you would like to join that conversation, let us know where you're tuning in from today. We'd love to hear from you. Additionally, if you should need to access tech support today, you can send us a tech support request via email to milfamln@gmail.com. Beyond that, let us know if there's anything else we can do to help you get situated today. But most of all, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're glad that you're here. Good morning, or perhaps good afternoon. Regardless, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Coral Owen. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for the Military Families Learning Network, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion. In case you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to give you a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you're currently able to view the slides we're sharing. If you can't see them or have any other technical difficulties, you can send us a tech support request via email to milfamln@gmail.com. As many of you have already done, we do look forward to having you join us in the chat pod today for conversation and for questions. To embed the chat so you don't miss any links or conversations, simply place your cursor over the shared slides. You should then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen, and then from there you can select the chat bubble icon. When typing your comments and questions, we invite you to select the All Panelists and Attendees response option from the drop-down menu. It's right above where it says Type Message here. This ensures everyone who's on today's webinar can view those as they come through in the chat pod. We'll also be covering evaluation and continuing education information at the end of today's session. Also like to let you know that you can download the slides as well as the event materials from the event page as well. The Military Families Learning Network is part of a DoD-USDA partnership for military families, and our passion is to connect military family service providers and cooperative extension professionals to research and to each other through innovative online programming. It's my pleasure now to turn things over to my colleague, Rachel Browner. She's the program coordinator with the MFLN Military Caregiving Team, and she will be our moderator as well as introduce today's speaker. Rachel?
Thanks, Coral. Thanks for the introduction and getting us kicked off today. Welcome, everyone. As Coral mentioned, we appreciate you guys typing in the chat pod where you're joining us from. If you haven't already done so, this makes this platform a little bit more personable by getting to know you and where you're located. So it looks like we have a good group on from both the East and West Coasts. So welcome today. I think it's going to be a great session. We have Dr. Lakshmi Mahadevan as our presenter for today, and she is not new to our webinar. She's presented on several topics for our group. But just to give a little background on Dr. Mahadevan, she is an extension specialist in special populations at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. She has a doctorate in educational psychology with an emphasis in career development education from Texas A&M University. Her areas of expertise include universal design for learning and accessible curriculum. She has more than 15 years of experience in conducting face-to-face and online professional development with educators in Texas, addressing various special populations related issues. She evaluates the accessibility of educational programs, oversees curriculum fidelity and quality control of a community-based life skills program for both youth aged 18 through 24, and she also provides subject matter expertise on advancing equity in career and technical education. So before I go ahead and turn over the presenter reins to Dr. Mahadevan, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is going to be an interactive webinar as much as we can in this virtual platform. And so please use that chat pod if you have any questions or comments for our team or the presenter today. Please use that option. I'll be posting some links into the chat pod as well. And for those of you that are joining us on YouTube Live, go ahead and post your questions and comments in YouTube Live, and we'll make sure to get them over to our presenter in our Zoom platform. So without further ado, Dr. Mahadevan, you are ready to begin.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you all can hear me all right. Thank you again for inviting me to present on this topic. I'm really honored to be able to follow up on our presentation that we did in August of last year about going back to school. However, this time we've actually wanted to concentrate specifically on virtual interactions because clearly over the past year and maybe even earlier than that, we've had very many concerns coming up with how do we make these interactions just as effective, just as engaging, but at the same time actually have the impact that we would like to have with clients who we may not be able to meet face to face. So what we're going to do now is actually have you involved right away. I'm going to pose to you some questions that I'm hoping that you all would be interested in thinking about and responding, not just now, but throughout the webinar using the chat button. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll and ask you to ponder. The first question is, thus far, maybe by now, we've all had at least a year or more of this experience of going virtual. So how has your experience been over this past year? And if you want to just put a few points in the chat, we'd appreciate that. I'm going to give you a second to look at this question. I've also gone ahead and added these questions to the chat pod. You can see them there, so they'll stay there for a second after the slide has moved on. So our first question is, how has your experience been? And if you would like to put some bullet points in the chat there, we'd appreciate it. Our next question, kind of isolated, Pete. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's much more, it's quite an individualized struggle, isn't it? On one end of a computer where the entire world seems inaccessible. It's been very positive and great. That's great, Tammy. Ongoing. It's new, right? It's definitely new. It's also something that's really at this point, I think, probably one of the formats that's going to remain. I don't think it's going to change over time. I learned the specifics and I'm better for it. Yeah, very, very true. We all feel probably more technically capable than we ever did before. It's good to still be able to engage with the youth we serve during, that is a brilliant point, Jennifer. Absolutely. Yeah, when the technical issues happen, I can see, Dawn, why that would be frustrating. My hope today, though, is to give you some tips on how we can pre-prepare for some of these issues and also troubleshoot maybe when we have it in real time. So not much has changed for you over the phone. Thanks, Bonnie. Testing, but a great way to connect. Confusing, some kinks, you work those out. Parents are concerned that their child with special needs was not learning virtually and difficult to engage on a computer. Thank you. That's actually one of my next questions. We were going to ask you as well what parents' concerns were. So I'm glad you brought that up, Irma. Slow but educational. Thanks, Robin. Yeah, I think you've all learned quite a bit of patience over time. Helpful, but you definitely learn more technology-wise. Peggy, thank you. My next question is, as a service provider or a helping professional, what questions do you have regarding virtual engagement? My hope is to maybe able to address some of those through my PowerPoint, but then if there are others, I'd be happy to take those on and either address them today or put together some answers and send them over to you over time. So as a service provider or a helping professional, what questions you have regarding virtual engagement? Okay. And while you're pondering that, what resources are available to parents? Yes, thank you. Tamara definitely will be addressing that today, how to work more effectively with families. Thank you. That's another objective we hope to accomplish today, Peggy. What are some what are some signs to show that there's too much virtual engagement? Interesting question, Christy. I'll definitely think about that as we move forward. Downloading materials has been helpful because it is difficult to remember the information. Yes, absolutely, Cynthia. So it has taken probably the place of things like where we used to get hard copies and handouts and things like that. Now we are able to download materials, keep them hopefully more organized in our computers or in other. To my management team, can we continue with the online meetings? It eliminates a lot of travel for me. Uh, I think, is that a question for somebody else, Jennifer? So one of the things that's very helpful about virtual engagement is essentially taking away some of the barriers we might have to accessing a physical space. Absolutely. So that's also a very good point, Jennifer. All right. As you think about other questions, I'm going to go ahead and pose our final question for you here, which is, what are your commonly asked questions that parents have given you over the past year, particularly our parents of children with special needs? So again, this is more from the parent perspective, questions that might have come up that they may have asked you, particularly in this past year, but even other questions that may have come up before that you would like addressed today, I'd be happy to address those. Because this webinar is sort of being presented to you on two different levels. One is to ensure that you have a more engaging virtual interaction with your clients, and the services you provide to them are that much more effective. But in addition to that, we're also hoping to empower parents and families and guardians, as well as students with special needs, to engage more effectively with you on the other side and become also more capable of engaging virtually with maybe their IEP team at schools, or doing better with interacting with everybody through this medium, since it has taken the place of providing special education face to face. How can they get their kids to focus? Is there tutoring available? Thank you, Tamara. Okay, as you think of other questions, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with our next slide, and I will try to address some of these as we go along. And if something gets missed, please do remind me towards the end and I will revisit. Thank you. Okay, so the learning objectives for today are, I'm going to give you some tips and strategies for effective virtual communication in general. And then we're going to look at some guidance that will hopefully help you prepare comprehensive presentations ahead of a virtual meeting. And I know that is very formal. If you think about comprehensive presentations, we are really thinking about, webinars or but really, when it comes to virtual engagement, the more pre-prepared you are and the more perspective you have when it comes to thinking about it as a formal presentation, the more likely you are to ensure that it is best and most effective. When presenting to younger children, the parents are usually right there, and I've appreciated their input. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. Why pretend they're not there? They are a source, a massive source of help, encouragement, making sure, maybe even making sure that the students stay in their seat, right? So absolutely, the parents are an asset in this whole area of service provision. And then suggested key questions. You're going to look at some questions to ask and ways to pre-prepare answers related to special needs, as well as access to resources for ongoing technical assistance. And we also have a one-page checklist that will be available to you. That's part of the resource list that goes with this webinar. So let's look at some tips and strategies now for effective virtual communication. The things that we want to be thinking about when it comes to virtual communication is what is it that, how do we speak, and how many times are we more prone to using a lot more words than might be necessary to convey the message that we have. So I would like us to all maybe really adapt the language of shorter sentences as much as possible, convey as much as information as you can in words that are simpler, use less jargon, but also make sure that they're rather shorter sentences so that you give enough pause time for the person on the other end of the video to maybe have some time to ponder, to process, and maybe come up with a question or two before we moved on to another topic. Also, if possible, don't read on camera. It is very difficult for somebody to keep attention on you when, first of all, you're not maintaining eye contact, when it seems like your attention is elsewhere, and that you're reading to them information that, remember, the reading grade levels of some of the information we might be reading may not be accessible to the person on the other end. So even if you are reading out loud to them, the language may still be difficult. So reading in general should be reduced, but also reading material, you need to make sure that that material is person friendly, and maybe something that needs to be reduced in terms of even technical jargon and maybe need to be explained rather than just read. Okay. Also, when you're thinking about how this meeting is going to go, think about themes. Make sure you have some of this content arranged in a way that's maybe even an agenda. As formal an agenda would be very helpful so that we know what we've been able to accomplish. We have a way to set it up so that it's almost a lesson plan for teaching. And you want to ensure that you're giving parents, guardians, all your participants, all your clients, specific things to do. The more practical we are, the more helpful it is for them to know, okay, what do I do now? What is my next action? And therefore, always use action sentences. So I like to always think of action sentences as things that start with a verb. Okay, so if you notice here on this page, I've given you actual action sentences themselves. So use short sentences, reduce, arrange, use, pause, and paraphrase. These are all actual verbs. So hopefully what you get from this is, okay, what do I need to do to communicate better? I can paraphrase, or I can reduce my sentences to be shorter, or I need to give participants time to respond. So it's an actual action that is practicable, that can actually be implemented. And what we find is the more action oriented something is, it is easier to understand. It's more hands-on. It gives a participant and the control over what they actually will be able to have control over when it comes to their child's special education. Because a lot of this field feels like, for parents, for students with special needs, even for anybody who is in that area, there's so much that is out of their control that it is helpful for them to actually have these activities to undertake. Also, we want to pause between making important points, and that way, that's why the agenda also becomes important, so that we can then ensure that all of this is getting processed and give participants time to respond. It is awkward. Silence is always awkward, and it is more awkward when we are on a virtual setting, on a video setting. So you can just say, okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes and I'll wait on this end, and that's fine. It's fine to give an actual time. It's also fine to set up a timer for yourself. If that way, the person on the other end is not feeling uncomfortable, not feeling pressured. And if they say, I don't have anything to say at this point, that also gives them time to say that, because they really may not have anything to say at this point. But in general, what we don't want to do is feel rushed, feel like we have to say something because it'll sound to the other person like the call dropped or things like that. Those are all typical responses to silence. And so what we want to ensure is that the silence is completely comfortable and actually more effective for both the recipient as well as the provider, so that when we are thinking about it, we are like, we know exactly how you're going to use this space of time and have a more effective communication because of it. And complete your thoughts. I'm very guilty of this. I have this very interesting habit of starting a sentence and then going off on a tangent and not actually finishing the original sentence. And I've had to learn to tell myself to complete my thoughts. And the same thing with virtual, it's even more difficult because we don't want our individuals on the other end to receive information that may be ambiguous, that may be incomplete, or maybe something where they make an assumption that ends up unfortunately being an erroneous assumption. So we want to ensure that you complete your thought, you clarify, and you're as accurate as possible. Also, that's why paraphrasing is also very important, so that when we have clients on the other end who don't complete their thoughts, or we have individuals who don't necessarily say something that immediately makes complete sense to us in terms of how do I respond to this, and we have an answer. The best way to do it is paraphrase. So you start with a sentence like, what I hear you saying, or can I make sure that this is what you said, or could you repeat what you said? Or if you don't want to say it out loud, you can even put it in the chat there if you're using a platform like Zoom, where you say, I've just, this is what I think you said, is this correct? So that the person can then see it both in black and white, as well as hear it from you. And that sort of supplements their learning about, yes, I can definitely tell you that that is what I needed to ask you or say, or they can just say, no, let me correct what you're thinking. Because the more opportunity we have to correct each other's thinking, the better. That way we're not headed towards, pardon me, that way we're not headed towards mistakes or errors. All right, any questions thus far? So what we're going to do is also think about the question that had come up here about too much virtual engagement. I think I'm going to say, Christy, that I think the best and important thing when it comes to communication is the shorter, the better. Too much virtual engagement could essentially be what I think is now called Zoom fatigue, is what I'm thinking you're thinking, Christy. And if not, then you let me know. Because what I'm hoping at this point is we all do a better job of knowing our own amount of fatigue. Thank you, Christy. As well as knowing what might be fatiguing for our clients. So I would say start with thinking about your meeting or your interaction. Start with thinking about it at maybe being 30 minutes to start with. Thinking about somebody seated in front of a computer for 30 minutes. Thinking about adult learning and the span of attention that somebody can give staring at a screen. I would say 7 minutes at the most is what any adult would be able to spend paying attention. Also think about there's no reason why everything has to happen all in one session. So if you set up agendas, then you can divide it up. It's actually an accommodation, right, that we provide for students with special needs. You have half an hour here, then half an hour tomorrow. So what you could do is set up a schedule where if you had a face-to-face meeting and you were usually doing an hour, remember there was commute time before that, commute time after that. So you're probably thinking about 2.5 hours, 3 hours here when it comes to an actual meeting face-to-face. But with virtual, we can be a lot more flexible there. The interaction does not have to be, I would say, 30 to 45 minutes. Christy, I think it is too much virtual engagement when there's way too much prompting. You're getting nothing from the client. You're hearing them sighing. You can hear all this. It's easy to hear some of these verbal cues, verbal and nonverbal cues on a camera, as well as even on microphone, that we may not actually have had that opportunity when we were facing them in an office setting. So I would say just gauge your own fatigue as well as your client's potential fatigue, and then make a plan accordingly. But I would say best practice, think about things or agenda items that probably can be talked about till about 7 to 8 minutes per item, and then up to 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and then maybe divide it up so the next meeting is about the same time. Does that help you, Christy? the other question is how to work more effectively with families. Good, thanks, Christy. So what I would say here is, we actually emulated for you this morning something similar to more effectively work with families. I think virtual engagement gives us a lot of opportunity to pre-prepare, and the pre-preparation applies not to you, not just you as a service provider, but also applies to the person who's on the other end, who's going to be receiving this information from you. There's absolutely no reason why we couldn't effectively use email or even the phone to call them and ask them what questions they may have ahead of time, so that when you have this meeting, it is totally driven based on your client's needs. And so almost instantly, the client on the other side, the family, the student with special needs and their parents is listening to you and saying, oh, you already have taken into account what I would like to learn from you. So that way they already feel like this is going to be a little bit more effective. Another thing about this is it is a very impersonal medium. How do you personalize virtual engagement? The way you do it is by just asking the family what they need from us, and then making sure that we have as much as we can on hand to give them the information. The other thing about something like this is the families also may not be cognizant with chat, for example. They may not be comfortable using a keyboard. They may not be comfortable opening up or using even a microphone, or even have the technology available to have this interaction that we would like to have a lot more personalized. But if we gave them the opportunity to interact with us over email or phone ahead of time, then we would be prepared more so. Then we could, do away with having them needing more technology than is needed to make the actual interaction a little bit more personalized. Okay, so the strategy is called preview review, and it is very effective with English language learners particularly. They know what's coming, and because they know what's coming, they feel less intimidated. It's the same thing with this platform when it comes to, for us as service providers. We are way more prepared. We are not concerned that we won't have issues. That we are not concerned that we'll have issues with either answering the questions or even dealing with the technology. Because if you're so certain that Zoom is not going to be the platform that can work with this client, then we're ready. We don't have to do technical troubleshooting there. We know already ahead of time that they are going to have an effective communication with us, just not through technological means that we currently have, but something else like phone or email. Okay, so we're really just thinking about getting more proficient using all these other alternate technologies as well. So I hope that helps answer some of the other questions about communication strategies that came up in the chat earlier. All right. Now, one of the things that we want to do with our virtual engagement is that it has to be motivating to our clients who are receiving it from us. So we want to remind them of things that they're already doing well, and remember their contributions for best practices. So this is very important. We need to make sure that as we listen to our clients, as we paraphrase, we make note of some of the things that they already have solutions for, and are really wanting to take the opportunity to remind them, hey, you do this really well. Why don't you do it again? So they may mention to you, for example, things like, oh, I use a visual calendar to remind my child to brush their teeth. Well, then tell them, use the visual calendar to add the lesson plans that maybe is happening now that they're doing virtual instruction with their schools. Or, oh, I have this habit where I tell stories to my child every night. Well, great, then have them then say, listen, why don't you look at some of the lessons that they are being taught, and then make stories out of those, and then remind them that that is a way to continue to work with their child with special needs at home, but then take on that teacher mode. That may be important. But essentially, what we're hearing is, what we're listening for are best practices, and just reminding our clients, listen, you're already doing some amazing things, and therefore I want to remind you to use them more often, because it'll continue to work with your child. And as much as possible, personalize those examples. Always use, if you can, the child's name, and also make sure you're pronouncing their names correctly, everybody's names, both the clients as well as the child with special needs that they might be referring to. And also ensure that you say things like, I remember that you said that Johnny liked this, and so maybe this is a way we can be ensuring that he or she has that opportunity, and things like that. So when you tell a client that you remember specific things about them, that makes it very important for their lives to be better, then that really helps the client to continue to be engaged with you, even if it is through a virtual medium. um, and I think as service providers, it's easy for us to have a lot of passion in this field. We wouldn't be doing this if we weren't wanting to do this for our clients very, very passionately, and weren't interested in ensuring that they were um, happy and had accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. So just let that passion show, and it's easy. It might feel strange, but actually your passion even will show through a virtual medium. So do not be concerned about that. But remember that there are some things where even emotions, I do believe that sometimes we, as face-to-face providers as well as virtual providers, there might be some things that make us stressful or frustrated. So we are empathizing with our clients. That emotion can also come through. It's fine, because our clients hear your empathy and appreciate it. Also be as respectful as possible. You do remember that if the client has a camera and you can see into their homes, then remember that we want to be ensuring that our expressions, our words, our even gestures, all of those might be visible to them, and ensure that those are all respectful. So you might be seeing some things. I have okay, no worries. Thank you, Jennifer. And there is a recording that you'll be able to visit, I think, at the end of this session. So one of the things that I think is very important is to ensure that that judgment that you might suddenly have of what you see about your client that you may not have seen before does not come through to your client through these virtual means. Remember that the camera is focused on your face, okay? It is likely that they'll be able to see some of your expressions. So be careful about what you might be expressing, even through your, even just your nonverbal expressions. I would say practice in front of a mirror, just see what your expressions look like, because in a face-to-face setting, sometimes those things get missed. But in a virtual setting where it's just you and the client and all they're focusing on sometimes is your face, it is easy to see some of these things that you think may be subtle, but actually may be quite visible to a client. Another thing is it is difficult. We might see some things that we are concerned about. We also might see some things that we're surprised about. We might get a little bit irritated if there's a dog barking in the background. You might see a lot more interference from children, for example. All of those are things that we need to be prepared for, because this client is now talking to you from their home, where all of this is completely natural to happen. Okay, which is another reason why I say keep the meetings shorter if you can, because then it's less chance for all of this interference to get louder or more difficult, and for things not to happen at all. Also, as much as possible, keep asking the clients, hey, what do you think? How did this go? Do you need me to do something different next time? Do you want me to consider using a separate different platform? Or even during this time, ask for feedback and incorporate any of those suggestions if you can, even right now or maybe the next time. Okay. So So I think Jennifer's point, I know she has left, but Jennifer's point about presenting to younger children but involving the parents is a great way to motivate them as well. I think parents often forget that they are the best means of information about their child. And even though it is easy for the parents to defer to the teachers or the special educators at the school when it comes to instruction, like it or not, parents have had to take on a teacher role now. So I think we should just really tell them and appreciate that if they help the child sit for a couple of hours, on a Zoom call, appreciate that. If they have helped the child to do a task or an activity at home and provided the materials for them to do that, then we appreciate that. And if they say that, yes, I was able to attend the IEP meeting virtually and I was able to speak with everybody, then we appreciate that. So we just really encourage our parents to have that kind of much more of a maybe a hyped up advocate teacher sort of role that they probably didn't anticipate before. But we really want to then use that those best practices that they already are showing and let them know that that is something that they we appreciate them doing that, and actually they ought to continue to do that whether or not virtual engagement becomes necessary in the future, because they have now learned new skills to communicate, which they should be able to continue using with their school and the special educators on the other end. So I think what resources available to parents. So I will be addressing that next. I think, but thus far, I think I've addressed most of the questions that came up. But if you have others, feel free to put them in the chat as we move on to this next section, which is guidance for preparing comprehensive presentations ahead of a virtual meeting. The thing that is important about thinking about virtual meetings is pre-planning. And I like to think about it as maybe something that starts 24 hours ahead. So if today I had a webinar today at 10 a.m. Central. So I started thinking about it at 10 a.m. Central yesterday morning. I pulled up my PowerPoint. I made sure that I had all my information handy. I double checked with Rachel to ensure that I had the link for Zoom, those kinds of things, right? So that's the kind of stuff you pre-plan ahead of time. So you set a time schedule for yourself that starts 24 hours ahead, but then you set a time schedule for the actual appointment itself. Like we said earlier, I like 30 to 45 minutes. Though, when I say that 30 to 45 minutes, that's the actual physical interaction that you might have with the client in the virtual setting. But then you plan for an hour and a half to deal with any technical difficulties. And by that, I mean, if your meeting starts at 9:30, you want to like get on your Zoom call at 8:30. You just want to ensure that all of the information that you want to have handy is handy. You want to ensure, for example, that the client gets a quick email with the Zoom link again this morning, and they may or may not check it, but it is good for us to give them a reminder that you have a Zoom call coming up, and please get on this link. Also, always ensure that if you're using a conference, a platform that has a phone number as an alternate, use that phone number as part of your invite, because clients always, I think, is important to have that provision for them to be able to call in if they're not able to get online. And also have the client's contact number, their cell phone number or something handy, so that if you're not able to use the platform, then you have a way to reach them anyway. Now, this is something that's interesting that I know that a lot of us have thought about. I mean, for me personally, when you wear a certain jacket or dress suit, or you dress professionally, I, for example, take on the persona of Dr. Lakshmi Mahadevan, right? And so for me, it's very easy to then become the educational psychologist or the one who presents webinars. So I think we need to do that even when we are at home doing a video conference call with our clients. I think we need to take on our service provider persona. And the way I think we need to do that is by dressing professionally. Now, I'm not against having yoga pants on, but what's visible on camera should be still as professional, because I think that helps us to get into the mode. And it also gives the clients an assurance and an appreciation for the fact that you're taking this as seriously as you would when you see them face to face. Okay, so do think about dressing professionally, even when you are on, you're in your comfortable couch or something, talking with your clients over a video conference. Also look at what your agenda has in store for you, any lesson plan. The thing about this is that preview review, so you don't have any surprises in your content. You don't want to have a client suddenly say, oh, I don't have an answer to that, or put them on a spot, or make them feel like they should have been pre-prepared as well, because this is our job to be pre-prepared, not for the client. Okay, so we don't want to have any real surprises. At the same time, do expect the client to surprise you, so we are pre-planning for that as well. Okay, and I really want us to sort of sit back and spend some time thinking about what is our video conferencing style. What kind of style that we have. So, there are things like learning style, there's teaching style. Well, I think now we have to have a video conferencing style that we have to self-assess and find out what it is that we do best when we do virtual engagement. So when it comes to your video conferencing style, it's awkward, but I think every person who's on the other side of a video camera, who's particularly a service provider, should try to look into the camera, because the temptation is to look at the client who is on a video somewhere on a thumbnail or something on your computer. It is easy to think that that is eye contact. It isn't. So try to look at the camera if you can, because looking at the camera, and you don't have to look at the camera the whole time. You can look away a little bit. That's fine too. But at least the client will feel like you still are maintaining eye contact with them. So that's part of the style that if you don't have that now, I think it's a good idea to do it. Also, as much as possible, modulate your voice and tone depending on what your content could be. So if you're talking about things that might be difficult, then you're automatically going to be talking in a softer voice, or ensuring that you are not adding stress to what is being said. But in general, just let the content drive your tone. And also, if you're like me, I've got to a place where I now warn individuals that I might be speaking too fast. I have this habit of doing that, and I just let people know to reiterate, to stop me and let me reiterate what I need to, or review something, because I feel like with video conferencing, some of your nervousness or some of the other things that cause you to have a tone or a voice change actually I think happens a little bit more with video conferencing, I think. So if you are sometimes face-to-face nervous, then you might be a little bit more nervous when it comes to video conferencing. So just remind clients that this is your natural style, that you're happy to revisit something, or let them know that you're happy to just stop talking so fast and slow down is fine. It's okay for them to correct you, essentially. And allow the recipient to cut short a call if needed. It can be frustrating, but if they need to walk away, then let them walk away. Also, say, can we talk about this another time? Or we can talk about this another time if you want. And that is also important to give, especially if something is traumatic or difficult. There's a article and there's lots of information out there that has shown that this past year and a half has been very difficult for students. Performance has dwindled all across the board, including on standardized testing. Parents have suffered a lot when it comes to being advocates for their children. There has been a lot of trauma associated with this pandemic and other kinds of social emotional concerns that have happened. So we are in a place now that we're providing what I would call therapeutic education. And in that case, we really want to give clients the space and time they need to maybe express themselves. So if you need to talk about this another time, we can, and let them know. And if you're in a place now to provide face-to-face, then maybe you should supplement some of this video conferencing topics, or defer them till you can meet with them face-to-face. Also provide an additional reference for the future. Anything that you think would help them to continue to think about what you have said to them. So this could be a URL, a PDF tip sheet, etc. If you use Zoom or any other platform, they often let you upload a handout, and you can do it that way, or you can send it as an attachment through email. You can do this ahead of time of the meeting, so the client is pre-prepared with some questions, or you could do it during the meeting. But if you share a URL, make sure they click on it. Okay, don't let them just let it go, because sometimes the chat could go further up and that's it, they've lost the URL. So make sure they click on it, have them bookmark it. If they're on the computer right then, bookmark it, or at least take a picture of the URL that you provided them with, so it's not lost. Okay. Also, make sure that if you're letting them upload, if you're uploading a PDF tip sheet, etc., then make sure that you give them the time to download it and confirm that they've downloaded it, okay, before you go off and talk about the next topic. Very, very important to just reassure a client that if you don't have the answer today, that you will find a resource for them. No clients are expecting all the answers today, and they're okay to know that you'll continue to spend time on this and that you'll get them the information they need, even if it is not today. Okay, so that's about video conferencing style. Does anybody have any other questions as we move on to the next topic? as you think about questions, I'm just going to go ahead and think about some key questions that I want us to think, have clients sort of answer ahead of time for us, or we want to be pre-prepared to ask clients, because we then want to have some answers for them as well. And some of these questions involve basic stuff, but there's also involving special education. So ask the client, what are your technology needs? Just let them know, hey, for the next several sessions, what about addressing a large group? So Pete, actually, I would say everything that we've talked about today, I think applies to a large group, except a few things, a couple of things. One is make sure you build in time for questions as much as possible with the large group. Also, see if you can ensure that each one of them, when they give you their name, that it's the username is the actual name of the client, because that way you can personalize your responses. So you can say, oh, John had a question about, and here's the answer. Or you can say, Mary had this question, and therefore. So on Zoom calls or on these other video conference calls, I think you can choose to have a username that is not you. So you want to ensure that you personalize the responses you have by saying out loud the person's name. The other thing that I would say is, with the large group, just let them know that I think you would have to obviously also give them a little bit more time. So maybe not a 30-minute session. I would say maybe an hour if you have a large group. Also, make sure that everybody has an agenda ahead of time for the large group, so that they all know what's going to be addressed. So it isn't just letting them know that we're going to be looking at a broad topic, but give them the specific topic. So when they come to you, they know that their needs are going to be addressed, and they don't feel like this is a group where I just have to listen and this doesn't apply to me. Okay, so we just want to pre-prepare them. Yeah, we want to pre-prepare them because if being part of a large group, you can get lost. Okay, so your voice is not heard. So we just want to let them know that, yeah, your voice is going to be heard. I also like to use all of these little what do you call them, little apps within Zoom, like breakout rooms. Good idea to use little breakout rooms so they can have personal discussions if there are like-minded individuals. The nice thing about working with parents with special needs are that they really learn from each other. So take good advantage of breakout rooms so that you can pair individuals up, or have them be in little breakout rooms where they discuss and say, here, think about this topic and how it applies to you, and give them that opportunity, and then have them come back and tell us what they've learned from each other. That way they get collaborators to work with. So also polls is another neat idea to use if that's possible, depending on the video conferencing setup that you have. I hope that helps, Pete. Also, I like to ask clients to just not tell them about, not just about the child with special needs, but the family as a unit. Who all is in your family? What's going on with them? What are your other children's ages? What are their concerns and challenges as they're going through COVID and COVID-related virtual concerns? What is going on with the family? What changes have been made? So I will also allude to the previous presentation we did in Back to School, where we really spoke about what could be going on with the family during this time. So as a service provider, give your clients the space to talk about the family as a whole, and what changes and good things that may have happened over this time that they would like to share with you. Also, always ask things like, how are things since last time? Because you might have had a week in between, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, what's gone on? And if you gave them tasks or you gave them things to accomplish, did you follow up on? Ask them those kinds of questions. Did you get this done? And what do you think worked? And what do we need to note for the future? We ask the participants this because we need to know what our own best practices are. But I believe that what we consider our best practice is really in the eye of the beholder. So if they like something and it worked for them, it's probably unique to them. But unless they tell us about it, we won't be able to repeat it and incorporate it further into our sessions in the future. So I do believe it's most important to ask each family and sort of have customized best practices as it applies to each family. And when it comes to special education, you want to talk to your clients about any school changes that might be happening. And these changes may be teacher related, classroom related. It could be virtual or in person. Also, if you're talking about young adolescents, age 16 and above, they're probably now thinking about occupation and career and transitioning to post-secondary. So we want to have questions that are specific to what work-based learning experiences are probably happening for this student now that they are not able to do some of these things face to face. What is the school's plan, and how are you helping the school make these transition, I would say, design this transition curriculum for your child. And then also, if they're meeting with their IEP, the individualized education program or plan, and they're on those meeting panels, what concerns they might have. Now, we as a service provider are not special educator experts. However, we have resources that we can give our clients to feel more empowered as they go through these IEP meetings, and also ensure that they are, by modeling for them the virtual engagement skills that we've talked about today, they're going to learn from you how to be better at virtual engagement in their IEP meetings, for example. For example, they may be pre-prepared with key questions, right? Or you might be pre-preparing them with technology and making sure that they're ready with whatever school technology is required. Also, you are sort of making sure that they can involve the student. A lot of times an IEP meeting may not involve a student. Best practice is the student should at least be involved if they're 16 and above. And certainly if they're 18 and above, they should be in their own IEP meeting. But when it comes to schools, they don't often do those kinds of best practices. So if you're on a Zoom meeting and the IEP meeting is occurring at that same time, there's no reason why your student couldn't be involved then. So you remind the parent to be ready to have your student there to provide their input. And what do we need to address next time? Really good to have agenda items on there that are actually formulated by or generated by your participants or your clients themselves, and ensure that the parents continue to have a plan for self-care and respite care, two different things. Self-care is all about, there's how do you deal with Zoom fatigue? How do you make sure that you take time to yourself? And now there's so little space now where you're away from the rest of the family. You're always in the same space now as some of um, your family members, and there's not much personal time. Well, then how do you ensure that whatever personal time you do get, you use it for self-care? Also, planning for respite care is even more difficult now than it was before, right? You don't really get away from anybody at this point. So respite care is all about, okay, what can we ensure that we have in place so that we can get a break from taking care of each other at this point? So those are some key questions I think we can pose to our participants, and then our participants can also then in turn learn about posing to their special education team in their school districts. All right. Do you have any other questions thus far? These are some clickable links. These are provided, correct, Rachel, through that resource list that we have. So these clickable links, yes, great. So these are links that, if you see, include some of our already existing webinars and podcasts that we've done. If you notice, I have one on social distancing that I think still applies. We also want to talk about having a healthful special education journey, whether or not it is it really doesn't matter. There might be certain things in there that have gone virtual, but this special education journey is still very critical. And a lot of us definitely continue to need to provide tips to parents to continue their journey successfully. And we also have a specific one here to manage routines, especially during times of change. And I do believe right now, this is something that we really need to help parents shore up their skills when it comes to managing their children's routine during these pandemic times. I also like this particular website, parentcenterhub.org. I do believe they have good information there. One of the things that they have information on is questions that are often asked by parents about special education services. And the nice thing is they provide you the answers there as well. So that might be something that we can be pre-prepared with. And then we also have some resources about transition, and that's for the age 16 and above. I have some additional resources here that I want us to be able to look at and use as we think about having difficult conversations, also effective questioning that you can do during remote learning. And essentially, when you provide this is from the teacher perspective, but I do think that support services are support services, and we as service providers can always do with more information on how we can make our support services more effective, particularly in a virtual environment. Okay, do we have questions or comments, and anything else that I would like you would like me to revisit or feel like a question wasn't answered? I'm going to scroll back up real quick to see if I missed anything from any of the questions that was posed before. Oh, there was a question about tutoring. Actually, that is actually very, very nice. Some of the developments that have taken place over time is that there are now provisions for first of all, schools have been delivering virtual education in what they call pods. And so that's another important thing. So schools have now been working with small groups. Teachers work with small groups during the day. So they don't have, like, for example, if your particular class had 15 students, now you're probably working with cohorts of 5. So I think that the whole virtual engagement and some of the innovation that teachers and educators are showing in providing virtual engagement, especially for special education, I think has really vastly improved. So I would remind you to ensure that all your parents talk very much with your teachers and ask them, what are you doing differently? How will my child continue to be enriched through this particular virtual engagement platform, considering that some of this had to happen face to face and isn't? That's one thing. The next thing I think is really helpful now is many of those teachers are earning or making sure that they have also providing tutoring. Okay, and they do that in a virtual way too. So check with your schools as to what tutoring, what other after school services are available virtually, so that your students can continue to get an enriched environment. What has been noticed over the past year and a half are lots of learning gaps. And so right now there's a lot of summer school stuff that's being introduced to make up for, or at least help close some of those gaps. So just get your parents to talk to the schools to see what's being provided. One thing I don't want to do is burden our parents with trying to find resources other than their own school, because their child's IEP is really dictating their child's special education journey. And that IEP is only available within their school system. It is not available outside the school system. So it is really important that we ask our parents to feel empowered enough to go back and ask key questions. And I think our questions that are back to school special needs and social distancing webinar really has some good questions that parents can ask about special education that's virtual, and that should be helpful to you. Teachers also need to remind themselves to remain engaged. Absolutely. That's one of the things that I think that a lot of teachers, there's been, I think, a 50-50% of 50% each growth. Some teachers have done amazing with virtual and would love to continue to be very use all the innovation that they've used on virtual to continue with that, as well as bring it back to face to face. Some teachers have struggled, and that's actually true at all levels, college, university, as well as public school and elementary and beyond. What I would like to remind everybody is, let's all understand that we're all in the same boat and we're all struggling. We're all needing to know what our video conferencing style is. We all need to know how to engage better. We all need to know how to deal with our Zoom fatigue and our video conferencing fatigue. So in fact, Rachel and I, we also have done a presentation on mindfulness, and we talk about social isolation and how we can deal with some of our own concerns as a service provider or as a teacher who's on this other end of the video camera. So yeah, I think one of the things that another thing I think teachers need to we need to just remind teachers to be honest, with parents, the same way I'm asking you to be honest with parents. If you don't have an answer, it's okay. We're looking. Give us time. We're figuring this out. It's okay for teachers to say this to parents. And I think it's okay. And I think it's important for parents to know that it's okay. And that parents should not feel like their child is going to be dropped by the system completely. They're trying. It may take them an extra year now, but they're trying. And everybody will try to get back on board. Everybody's trying to make a plan. The IEP needs have to be still met by law. So yes, everybody is trying their best to continue to provide those IEP services. There's been a lot of innovation. There's been a lot of thinking about the student. The good news is we've also had a lot more internet access provided to rural areas. So we might be in a position now to get information out to students who are probably never getting that kind of information. We're also in a better position now to help parents be our partners and collaborators. Parents are not just parents now, so we really should remind teachers to use those parents as our assets and teach them to help each other. So that is it, and we are at the end of the webinar. If anybody has any other questions, I'll be on for a few more minutes.
Thanks, Dr. Mahadevan, and thanks everyone for joining today's session. We are providing CE credit for social workers, LPC, LMFT, case managers, patient advocates, certified family life educators, and those that are just needing a general certificate of completion to provide to your supervisors. We are offering all of those. You will need to complete our survey. So if you go to our event website, which I've pasted that link several times throughout the chat pod. So that event page will have a section with a nice purple button towards the middle saying continue education. If you click on that button, it'll take you through the process to receive an automatically generated email certificate. Now, if you have any questions, if you have any issues with receiving your certificate, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Again, my name's Rachel Browner. My email address is on the slides as well as in the chat pod. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any issues receiving that certificate for attending today. Also, please note, we are providing a webinar next month. We're going to continue our conversation on working with providers and families with special health care needs. So next month, July 28th, mark your calendar. We are going to be having a 60-minute webinar on navigating education laws and policies for military families with special needs. And so we are going to have a presenter that is with the Air Force. She's a retired attorney, and she's going to be speaking on core legal questions that parents face when interacting with the school system and highlight some of the differences in the rules from state to state. So join us next month, July 28th, for that webinar. There is still time to RSVP to join, so get connected with us. And we're going to stay on. We're at the top of the hour, but we'll stay on for about a minute or two for you to gather any last minute links. Please, again, thank you. Let us know if you have any questions, but also, again, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time today and hope you have a great rest of the week.
And I've also put my Twitter handle on the chat, so I continue to add resources to that. So if anybody's interested in this ongoing resource search, please do follow. Thank you.
All right, we're going to officially close out the room for today. Again, thank you, Dr. Mahadevan and Rachel, for a wonderful session. Don't forget to head over to that event page for all of your needs for today's webinar, but also don't hesitate to reach out to Rachel and her team if you should need any follow-up assistance. Thanks again. Have a great day.